Most of the time when I make a top 10 video or any kind of listing for that matter, it involves either champions or abilities, but another aspect of League's history that I think deserves a mention would be items. I've gone over items many times in the past, mind you, but I realized I never actually made a video talking about which items were definitively the most game warping, or should I say game shattering. So you know what, let's do that for today. In this video I'll be going over the 10 most overpowered items in League history, at least in my opinion, talking about why they impacted the meta as badly as they did, and why they were changed if not outright deleted from the game. For some additional context, like champions, items are balanced on a frequent basis, and at one point or another virtually every single item in the game has been overtuned or overpowered at one point. Thing is, you can easily write off a couple weeks of an item being a bit stronger than most. For example, when Storm Surge came out at the beginning of Season 14, it was pretty crazy, but then they hotfixed and nerfed it, and then it's been decently okay ever since. You can argue for that specific time it was the most horseshit 60% win rate item in the game, but the ones I'll be going over are uniquely special for being even more egregious than that, or for promoting a degenerate playstyle. So let's get started, and this list will not be ordered, by the way. Spirit Shojin is an item that's gone through multiple iterations throughout its tenure. A big reason for that is how difficult it is to properly balance while still being effective due to the nature of the item. Shojin as a concept is all about rapid ability casting, giving AD casters a way to keep pace with the rising DPS of other champions in the late game. The first official re-release of Shojin onto Summoner's Rift in 9.3 was a treat to behold. Though its gold efficiency was objectively awful in regards to base stats, on top of having a very high cost and suboptimal build path, the item more than made up for it with an exceptional passive wherein upon activation of your ultimate, the next basic attack would give you a surge of attack speed and cooldown refunds on hit. This item was meant to complement champions who used a mixture of attacks and abilities, particularly those with a steroid type ultimate. Riven, Jax, Renekton, Xinjiao, those guys. Compared to other items on this list, Shojin was not too prolific in regards to who bought it, but for the champions who did, the power spike was so substantial, a champion with just Shojin could outduel a champion with 2 items. That's how broken it was. You'd be staring down someone who basically played with Earth cooldowns. This iteration of Shojin lasted less than a year before it was removed from the game, and good riddance too. I enjoy playing Renekton, but I can acknowledge this was a very rough item in terms of balance. Essentially, it devolved into whichever champion got it first. Yet another classic item, we have Deathfire Grasp, commonly referred to as DFG. One of the most notorious items referenced throughout League history. It gave 120 ability power 10% cooldown reduction, and had an active where on a point and click it would deal 15% max health damage to the target, no strings attached. Just a plain 15% max health damage at the press of a button. Furthermore, for the next 4 seconds, the target would then receive 15% increased magic damage from all sources. Funny story, it used to be 20% at one point. Expectedly, DFG was meant to reward anyone with front-loaded damage, aka the Burst Mage class. Ahri, LeBlanc, Annie, Veigar, Lux, I'm pretty sure Old Devlin took it too. Pretty much, anyone who could sequentially combo their abilities had a reason to buy this item. Combining the 15% max health damage with the subsequent amp, DFG's active alone made it do just as much as an ability, effectively granting the holder 4 basic abilities instead of 3. Just like Shojin, the outcome of lane hinged on whichever champion bought it first, since from then on you were guaranteed to lose every trade without fail. I think in the modern day, DFG wouldn't be nearly as problematic given the relative scope of items power crept a decent amount, but the fact that you had a point-and-click nuke is what made it so crazy. At least for Luden's Companion or Storm Surge, there's a conditional aspect to their respective burst damage, whereas Deathfire Grasp had none. Point-and-click instant activation, it was too easy to use and could even help out the team thanks to boosting magic damage from all sources. This next one will be 2 items because they technically have the same basic principle, Feral Flare and then later Sated Devour. An interesting jungle upgrade, but one that sparked an entire breed of what we called AFK junglers. Wriggle's Lantern and Enchantment Devour shared a stacking mechanic wherein every champion takedown and large monster kill you would permanently gain a stack that would cause your attacks to deal bonus magic damage on hit, eventually transforming into Feral Flare and Sated Devour respectively. Feral Flare maintained its stacking capability until the game's end, meaning with enough farm this item could do more on-hit damage than its end at a fraction of the cost while also healing you. Meanwhile, Sated Devourer would lose the cap on stacks, but in return, after getting 30 camps and/or takedowns, every other basic attack would apply on-hit effects twice. Anyone who could auto-attack a bunch and preferably had on-hit effects like Goldudir, Jax, Master Yi, Shyvana, Old Aatrox, and so on abuse these items like crazy. They would be able to reach unimaginable levels of power without having to really interact with the enemy team at all. Feral Flare was more of a stat stick, while Sated Devour was a champion-altering item, Mastery double striking basically every other attack, Jax dealing his 3rd attack bonus damage every 2 attacks instead. Both items are so overpowered that they were stripped from the game entirely, with Feral Flare never having been seen again, and Sated Devourer moving to Guinsoo's Rageblade, adding many conditions to discourage widespread purchase of it, and even then, rather than every other auto attack, it was every 3rd auto attack, drastically lowering the influence the item had on the champion. Although, I think more people hated this item not for how strong it was per se, but because it encouraged the jungler to AFK farm for 20 minutes over their other obligations as a jungler. Granted, it was still extremely overpowered. Speaking of extremely overpowered, let's talk about an item that, in the words of Tyler 1,
"They're hot fixing it? Nice! How did it even make it in live?"
Banner of Command is a prime example of how Riot tried to make an item that was obviously meant to be gimmicky into one with an actual strategic application. The base stats weren't really of much import. What you really cared about was the active, granting a massive buff to a nearby minion that boosted their stats, damage to towers, and made them significantly harder to take down. Originally, this item was intended for siege purposes. You would use it on the cannon minion for the most benefit, granting it total immunity to magic damage. Combining that with the Baron buff giving cannon minions the ability to attack towers from a far distance, and you know what, let me just play the clip, it speaks for itself.
Boom! That takes 8 shots. 2. We're just gonna count them. 3. How do you get past that? 4. Got kicked backwards, Roar of the Slayer.
So that's why you pick Sign in this meta.
On a side note, I love how the top laner who's playing Ornn is named Prophet, because that, my friend, is money well spent for sure. Considering mages have some of the best wave clear in the game, especially when dealing with sieges, total resistance to magic damage may have been a bit discriminatory, so they decided in version 8.11 to make it a 70% universal damage reduction instead, ironically making it even more tanky because now even physical damage champions could barely damage it. They ended up hotfixing it really quickly that same patch, which is what the earlier Tyler 1 clip was in reference to, but then they realized how awfully designed the item is and removed it the very next patch. Banner of Command was a very fun item when you were the one using it, not so much when you were on the receiving end of it. Depending on the team composition, sometimes you would have zero way of stopping it too, making it a guaranteed loss if the enemy team had 2 or 3 of them. Now, the year before Banner of Command, there was Ard and Sensor, which is still around now, but at one point, it may have been the most gold efficient item of all time. Out of consideration for it being a fairly underpowered item for most of its time, they made a change to it back in Preseason 7 that made it so the attack speed and on-hit damage buff would also cause the champion to heal on-hit. If you remember, Feral Flare had something similar to this, on-hit magic damage and healing. That one single change, adding on-hit restoration, made this item go from niche to practically universal overnight. For the entirety of Season 7, this item was ubiquitous. Whether your team consisted of basic attack-oriented champions was a moot point, since most enchanters could realistically buff everyone on their team simultaneously in a full rotation. You were able to give everyone the equivalent of, I believe it was like 2,000 gold worth of stats each with just one item. A very simple premise, but my god was it overpowered. What's interesting is that for the majority of Season 7 it was allowed to be like that. The changes took place at the start and then it wasn't addressed until Worlds, at which point it was too late. To give you an idea how influential this item was, tank supports were intentionally running the Keystone Mastery Stoneborn Pact, the Font of Life before Font of Life basically, as it offered a heal to anyone who struck a crowd-controlled target. Obviously they realized adding a heal made Ard and Sensor to all purpose, and so they took it away at the end of the season. I think more people remember the legacy of this item not solely for how strong it was, but also for how long it was allowed to be that way. Next item is also another very simple one from way back in the day. I believe it was around until early Season 1, so most players may not even know this item existed. Zhonya's Ring, a very simple item. You know Zhonya's Hourglass, right? That annoying ass item that's a bane of every assassin in Diver's existence? Okay, now do you know Rabadon's Death Cap, the item that gives a metric ton of AP and then gives you more AP based on the AP you currently have? Combine them together, that's Zhonya's Ring. It coalesced the active of Zhonya's Hourglass with the stats of Death Cap into one. I don't think I need to explain any further why this item would never, and I repeat, never be acceptable in the modern day. The main drawback of Zhonya's, theoretically anyway, is that you take a measurable loss of DPS by building it over something like Shadow Flame, Storm Surge, Void Staff, things of that nature. By combining Death Cap and Zhonya's, you get the best of both worlds, the sheer offensive pressure of the former, and the moment's reprieve of the latter. Over in Arena right now, I think they have a similar item called Wooglet's Witch Cap, but Arena is intended to be an inflated Mario Party-esque game mode anyway, so they're allowed to do whatever they want over there. Point being, in present-day Summoner's Rift, Zhonya's Ring would cause an uproar the likes of which have never been seen before. Moving on, Black Cleaver is a staple item of this game, always has been. It provides a comfy array of stats that any AD caster can appreciate: health, AD, ability haste, and 2 fairly universally applicable passives. What was so crazy about this item? So, a while ago, and by that I mean a long while ago, Black Cleaver used to build off of the Brutalizer. On top of shredding the target's armor, it would also have flat armor penetration, and so by building hypothetically 6 Black Cleavers, a single instance of physical damage would apply all stacks on the target right away, and with 6 Black Cleavers plus any supplementary armor pen you had from runes or masteries, the holder in question would be allowed to basically deal true damage to any enemy champion that didn't build armor, all while having a decent amount of health, max cooldown reduction obviously, and tons of AD. I'm actually fairly certain the Black Cleaver meta is the reason we have unique item passives today. Certain items would be insanely overpowered if you were allowed to build more than one of them, let alone if they had a stackable passive. Just imagine if you had, say, 6 Death Caps or 6 Infinity Edges. You literally one-shot everyone you touch. That was sort of the Black Cleaver meta in a nutshell. Everyone who could build the item built it, multiple copies of it at that. Such a simple oversight that gave rise to one of the most toxic metas in history. This next item might be a hot take because I'm sure most others would have picked a different one over this, but I want to give mention to Duskblade of Drakthar. I made a full video on it for crying out loud. Unlike the other items on this list, I think Duskblade deserves mention for most if not all of its iterations. The set Deathmark passive, the invisibility upon takedown, and the intargetability upon takedown. All of them were offensive in one form or another. If I had to choose which one was the most annoying though, it would probably be the stealth one. While intargetability is obviously worse, at the very least it could only happen like once every 30 seconds or so, meaning it would only activate once per fight, give or take. The stealth one, however, could activate multiple times, so the holder would kill someone, go invis, kill someone again, and go invis again, and snowball like that over and over. That being said, all iterations of Duskblade were equally problematic, and I'm finally glad they took the item away. Second to last item will be Divine Sunder. Oh my god, this item was, this item still is, even in death, the sin of humanity. I swear to god. You guys remember Ard and Sensor, right? Why Riot was crazy enough to give a DPS-oriented buff to a sustain component? The same goes for Spellblade. Adding on to that, why did they feel like it was a good idea to make it a tank shredding item too? If there was ever an item that had zero counterplay to it, it would have to be this. Attack damage, health, ability haste, a Spellblade which implies you're meant to use it many times, and then heals for the damage dealt, while also having arguably the best mythic passive in the game, 5% armor and magic penetration per legendary item. This item did literally everything. I don't think I saw a single Triforce purchase while Divine was around. Why would you when this item did more DPS anyway? At one point, it did 12% max health damage per proc and heal for almost 8% of the target's max health, which I believe was pre-mitigated damage, not post, so you couldn't reduce healing by reducing the damage. Divine Sunder single-handedly killed off the tank class in seasons 12 and 13. You just could not survive against a champion once it got Sunder. Camille, Jax, Fiora, Volibear, Wukong, Illaoi, Nasus, Viego, Hecarim, Rengar, Vi. Scores of champs took advantage of the wide range of use cases Divine Sunder had, and they made good use of it. I might be biased because I'm a top main, but trust me, when Camille goes from doing 200 true damage per Q to 600 damage with one item and then healing half her HP back with every Q, you have not known the miserable experience of dealing with Divine Sunder at top laners. To this day, I had no idea how they thought that item was okay. Last item is Ninja Tabby, the most broken item in the game. Okay, in all seriousness though, I find it funny that we complain about how broken all these items are when tabbies, or play the steel caps as they're called now, may be one of the most insidious items in the game. That thing probably mitigates tens of thousands of auto attack damage over the course of a game. It's just they have no metric on the tooltip that shows how much you block. The real final item I want to go over though is Hallbreaker. Hallbreaker was introduced as a way to give split pushers a real edge over the competition by granting tons of extra armor and magic resist when fighting alone, while also empowering siege minions to be tankier and do more damage to towers. It was considerate of them to acknowledge the validity of split pushing as an alternate win con, but their way of promoting it was anything but healthy. Hallbreaker became notorious for being one of the few items in the game with the gold efficiency above 150% with the isolation effect active. Reminiscent of Spear Shojin, the only way you could realistically take out someone with Hallbreaker was by also taking Hallbreaker. The holder would get tons of health, tons of attack damage, a bit of movement speed even, and then tons of armor and magic resist. All relevant stats with the exception of ability haste essentially. The funny thing is, as a way to counter Hallbreaker, they made Anathema's Chains, which did nothing to respond against it whatsoever. Though it was meant to be situational, because all the item really gave was just stats, it ended up being too universally usable to the point where people were building it not necessarily for split pushing, but just to have good combat pressure. Even without the armor and DMR boost, the item was still like 110% gold efficient, so you weren't being punished for grouping with your team either. The stats alone were good enough to where even Garen and Darius were building it despite not being particularly effective at split pushing, kind of underscoring how overloaded it was. Alright, those are my 10 items. There are still plenty of other items that could have been featured in this video like Runic Bulwark, Innervating Locket, Mattress Blood Racer, Death's Dance at one point even, Heart of Gold, Stridebreaker, Cinderhulk. Many of these items could have replaced one of the 10 I chose, but I don't feel too bad about the 10 I went with. Let me know your thoughts on the items in the comments down below if you have any anecdotes of your own you want to share. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, it would be great if you gave it a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter @VarsFarum, join my Discord server, and check out my other item discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.